Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for being here or for tuning in later, depending on when and where you're watching this. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. I am Christina Sloan-Hagen. I'm a pediatric and biochemical geneticist from University of Michigan. And so drawing pedigrees is something that I do day in and day out, but I think everybody here appreciates that is not everybody's bread and butter. And so we thought that it would be good to have a little reminder in case it's been since med school or since undergrad, since you had to draw one of these. Go ahead and switch slides for me because it didn't go for me. Thank you, thank you. My basic goals are to discuss why we want to do this, review some of the basic symbols. I also have some resources for you because there are definitely niche situations that you may run into, but I don't want to spend everybody's time talking about all of the potential options and situations that you could run into when there's some really helpful resources out there, and I'll point you to those. And then I'll give you kind of a live action example of how I draw a pedigree. And depending on how much time we have, I'll also discuss some of the verbiage that I try to use depending on what it seems like somebody's medical literacy is. The plan long term is to have an electronic tool that we can use, but we're still working out some of the kinks and deciding exactly what that tool is and how we're going to integrate it into our data collection. Go ahead and switch slides. Historically, pedigrees were really helpful when it came to mapping and doing linkage analysis and finding candidate loci and gene loci, or excuse me, gene candidates. And we would end up with the gigantic pedigrees. You'll notice this is like 7 generations. This is definitely not what I am expecting of all of you, but historically, these were really important in our better understanding of genetics of all genetic conditions. Go ahead and switch slides, please. Clinically, I would say my pedigrees are much more simple. I aim for a 3-generation pedigree when I can. Obviously, sometimes you have limited family data, especially if you're dealing with adoption or things like that, or if one side of the family is unknown. But it's really helpful in us trying to create a more comprehensive understanding of somebody's family history. If you talk to somebody in the general public, they may not necessarily appreciate that seizures and vision loss or walking difficulties or talking and swallowing difficulties can be related. And so a family may not appreciate that disparate traits can actually be really important together. And so getting that comprehensive family history through a pedigree can be really helpful. It's also helpful in us kind of communicating with one another, of having that kind of shared terminology or shared language on how we're communicating about the families that we are learning about and taking care of. From a genetics perspective, it's also a really quick way to figure out on the back end, who do I need to do cascade testing for? So if I have a kiddo who has younger siblings and I'm interested in Batten disease, whether they are whole siblings or full siblings or half siblings, is going to determine markedly how anxious I am to get them tested really quickly. And so I will say, compared to that example that I showed you on the last slide, we do simplify a little bit, but we try to include all of the kind of blood relatives. So as you'll see in my drawing, I don't, include all of the aunts and uncles that have married in. Go ahead and switch slides. Thank you. This is my favorite resource. This is what I give to rotators. It's a bit old. I think it's 20 years old, almost 25 years old. And so it is outdated in that it says sex. The symbols that we use, the squares are male, circles are females, diamonds are undetermined or unspecified, but they are referring to somebody's gender identity, not specifically to their sex anymore. And I'll show you on the next slide how we kind of get around when those don't align perfectly. But we're going to draw everybody with a square, a circle, or a diamond. You're going to mark the person that you're most interested in, your proband, with a little arrow. You can mark who's deceased with a slash. If we're dealing with more traits, I tend to just write them out, as you'll see. And then we can note adoption or consanguinity with a double relationship line. We can note when somebody's a twin, and we can note various, pregnancy states or infertility. Go ahead and switch. And then this is so if you scan this, and you should be able to, if you look back at the YouTube, scan this QR code and get to this publication, because it is your go-to for those like atypical situations where you have unconventional parentage. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but let's say that you've got a situation where you have an individual who considers themselves non-binary, but they were assigned female at birth. And so they are a diamond, but they get labeled with AFAB, assigned female at birth, and they use donor sperm to carry a pregnancy. You can draw that out. And there's lots and lots of situations and lots of examples. This paper also has some other good resources as far as things that are helpful to include, like the date that you collect your pedigree, or who is your reporter. Let's say that for your initial intake visit, that dad is the only parent that comes, and so he doesn't know a ton about mom's family history. Well, if you write that down, next time maybe mom comes, you can fill that in a little bit. And so it can be helpful to write down kind of who and when, and it also makes it easier to update if that's appropriate. I, in clinic, don't specifically write out those, traditionally you'd have your Roman numerals like 1, 2, 3, and so on for your generations. I don't do that clinically because it's usually pretty easy to see our pedigree and our generations, but you definitely can if you're trying to go above and beyond. Go ahead. So next I'm going to hopefully share my screen. This is a sign that you have too many screens open. There we go. All right. So hopefully you can see my screen. So I'm just going to draw really quickly a pedigree. So we'll start with a simple one. Let's say we have a 5-year-old who comes to see us in clinic, and he started having seizures at 3 and walking problems at 4, and then he was diagnosed with CLN2, and his mom is 35 and healthy, and dad is 39 and healthy. And we'll do it simple at first, and we'll say dad is an only child, and his dad passed away from an MI in his 30s, and grandma is alive and well. And on mom's side, she was also an only child in this first example. And her mom died of, let's say, Alzheimer's, and her dad is alive and well. So that's simple. So we've got a simple example. However, they unfortunately get complicated pretty quickly, because let's say that little Johnny has 3 siblings, and he has 2 full siblings, one younger sister who's 2 and one older sister who is 8. And then he also has a half older brother who's 19, and all of them are healthy, but that brother's actually getting married and maybe thinking about having kids before too long. And ultimately that younger sister is so young that maybe we're worried about pre-symptomatic screening. And then let's make this even more complicated. So dad, let's say he has 3 sisters. So I can simplify that a little bit. If everybody's nice and healthy, and I'll say 3 sisters, and they each have a number of kids. We'll call that good. And let's say mom has twin brothers who are identical, and one of them has 2 daughters, one of whom was initially assigned male at birth, and the other who is alive and well, and this other brother has two sons from two different partners, one of whom has autism, and the second of whom was adopted out. So you can kind of see how that goes from pretty simple to getting more and more complicated. And especially if you have situations where you've got kind of mixed families, you can definitely have more and more complicated pedigrees. And so part of the reason why I wanted to do this on pencil and paper first is before we get to using an electronic facsimile uh, tool, you have to know what you want something to look like, because on a lot of those tools, if you click in the slightly wrong spot, it's going to make it incorrect. And since we're starting just to talk the same language, I want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about. Go ahead and share my slides again. I have just, I think, a couple more. Thank you, Nadia. So the last thing I just want to take like 1 minute. In genetics, we often will ask, a group of questions for anybody. And so I'll present it once I get everybody collected, and I'll be like, anybody in the family who has a heart problem as a child, hearing loss as a child, and I kind of rattle them off. More important for us, we want to make sure that we are double checking all of the traits that could be associated with our phenotype of interest. So does anybody in the family have seizures or vision loss or walking or speaking difficulties or developmental regression? Asking about those things can be really important. And then something that we still ask about in genetics every day is consanguinity. I don't ask it that way. I ask any chance the two of you are related by blood, like cousins. And I will say, personal soapbox, you have to wait for the awkward laugh to die down. You have to wait for them to either say yes or no, because every once in a while we do get a yes. And from a genetics perspective, that does tweak ever so slightly what we're looking for and what we're thinking about. It's probably not going to change our plan of action, but it can help us think about, are there other family members that we're going to have to think about testing additionally because of that fact? And hopefully I've gone quick enough that we have a couple minutes for questions. So if anybody has questions, please feel free.
Thank you very much for walking us through either a refresher or a new introduction to taking family histories and drawing pedigrees. As each site thinks about who is going to be taking on that role, how do you suggest people practice or get comfortable? As I watch you draw a pedigree, I don't know that I've ever been able to be that quick.
Great. Well, and I will say, like, doing this live action takes some time. Like, I would plan for a good 10 to 20 minutes just for this data collection. And it can take longer depending on how much people tend to meander in their thoughts. My suggestion is, if you have a designated person, first draw your own pedigree, because those are the people that you know best. And then if you have a significant other or a friend that you know that has a big family, ask them if you can draw their pedigree. Because taking that practice time does make things a lot more efficient when you are then sitting down with your patients or your research subjects to try and collect that data. And in the end, if you have questions, send me an email. My email is on the first slide there, so that should be captured on the YouTube. And like I said, I'm here to be helpful, and if there are weird things that pop up, pass it on to me. But I think a little practice goes a long way as far as your comfort of getting used to. And do you have any nieces or nephews on that side of the family? How many? Are they full siblings or half siblings? It can take a while to get your terminology right. And so that it a little practice.
Thank you again. It looks like we have a question from Dr. Ashkar.
Hi, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I apologize in advance in case I missed this or blanked out when you said it. But when it comes to ethnicity, we
Mhm.
have stopped asking this question clinically when we're doing our clinical pedigrees. And in a disorder like CLN, I think it matters given that there are some ethnicities that have specific variants or specific subtypes. What are your recommendations on this?
Great question. I think we've taken very much the same pathway forward where if we don't think it's going to be clinically significant, I don't ask. I'm more likely to ask on the back end, but and I will say if there was something that I was thinking of and I thought that I could maybe be more targeted in my testing, I may ask, but unless I think it's really clinically relevant, I often don't ask, and I may ask on the back end if they have those common variants. But I think that is something that we can decide as a group. But I think it's if we want to collect that data, we just need to communicate amongst ourselves as to what are the expectations when we're collecting a family history.
Dr. Dango.
Hi, sorry if I missed this. Thank you for the presentation. Do you have recommendation as to how to approach when I first started doing these pedigree? It can be overwhelming because then you ask about family history and they start talking about, oh, my second cousin and
Mm,
uh, my sister on my father's side, and it can get really quote unquote
yeah,
disorganized. So do you
yeah.
start out with I'm going to ask about your health, and then I'm going to ask about your mom's health and your mom's side of the family, and then I'll go back and ask about your dad's
Yeah.
health and your dad's side of the family.
Yes. So, and I will say my approach depends a little bit on the feeling that I've gotten from the family from earlier in our visit. But if they seem to be a little more tangential or like to meander, I become very directed in how I ask my questions. So I will say, let I'm going to talk about your family history. And then I'll say, how many siblings does Johnny have? And so if they are big talkers, I really kind of tighten it down. And so Johnny, in my example, had three siblings. How many are full siblings and how many are half siblings? Two are full siblings. Two sisters, and are they older or younger than him? And I know that's a lot of extra questions, but not giving them full reign for, open discussion can definitely make it more efficient overall. And then once I've, collected the people, and sometimes when you have somebody that wants to tell you about that second cousin, I will either write it down to be kind, or I'll say, we really want to focus on the people close to Johnny, related by blood. Big question. It's hard.
Dr.
Yeah.
Kayana.
If your hospital is already using a software or some app to collect pedigree, is it okay if we use use that app while the whole group until we decide as a group that we're going to use an electronic app or some sort of software? And the second part of my question is if we do have a resource available in the clinic, like a genetic counselor, is it okay if and they are visiting with the family to identify individuals at risk or for some other reason, is it okay to use their pedigree or let them collect the pedigree data?
So for the answer to your first question, my group currently still use paper and pencil. We do handwritten pedigrees. The adult genetics group at University of Michigan does use an electronic pedigree tool that I don't have access to, unfortunately. And then I don't know that we've discussed specifically about who can or needs to be collecting the pedigrees, but I don't see a problem with, as long as the family is agreeable and the pedigree is up to date, with utilizing one that's been collected by a genetic counselor. They're fabulous at this.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add a couple of things to that. I'm not sure I have the exact answers about that just yet. Some things that come to mind. One, for electronic tools that are already being used in the clinical setting. I know a lot of people are using Epic for collecting pedigree data. Once we have selected an electronic platform, we'll want to ensure that there is compatibility if we are going to go that route, whether that is an electronic health record kind of tool, or if it's a different standalone tool, we will need to work through a logistics process for how we might import those data. So thank you for that question. We will add that to our planning so that we can think that through. In terms of someone else collecting the pedigree information, I think, again, similar to Dr. Sloan-Hagen, what was just said, generally that's fine. The question will be, do we have any additional specific questions that we want everyone to ask in family history? And so there may be an element of adding a few questions to a pedigree that's already been obtained. And part of the reason that we're focusing on this is that we think that adult onset neurodegenerative disorders are going to be a specific kind of question that we'll want to, over the long run, be able to evaluate. So there may be a couple of additional things that if someone already has a pedigree, you may be reviewing it and then you say, okay, let me make sure this information is accurate. Let me ask you a few additional questions, and then we'll work out the data entry, data integration pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you, Erica.
Dr. Shiloh Malosky.
Hey, thank you. Just to follow up on the ethnicity or country of origin question, I think that for these disorders, it's very important, since there are kind of consideration of mutation-specific interventions. So my vote would be to collect this data.
Thank you. And we'll bring that information also to the group as we get to the point of CRFs to make sure that we are thinking comprehensively about how we collect those data.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sloan-Hagens, for your